Handling poorly documented edge cases is tough. Using nulls to represent no value and then having to check for nulls all over the place is bad. Remembering all the possible subtypes of a base class is definitely hard. All in all, relying on you remembering things is simply a recipe for disaster. That's why you should model your domain in such a way that wrongly written code doesn't even compile. That's right, you can actually prevent many runtime crashes and get notified about errors in the code editor before hitting the run or build button. Hello, welcome to Reset Coder, where you are getting prepared for real app development by building better, faster, more stable apps. So subscribe and hit the bell if you want to grow your coding skills. We're going to demonstrate all of this, how to design with types, so to say, on building a small part of a fake CRM, which means customer relationship management. And the part which we are going to be sort of building will be responsible for sending out physical letters. And our CRM supports only customers from the USA and also from Canada. And as you know, one component of a postal address, of a physical postal address, is the state, for example, Florida for the US located customers. And then there is province for Canadian customers, for example, Ontario. And it's precisely the state or province where you're going to learn how to design with types and also how to use subtypes. And be sure to check out the written tutorial from the link in the description, where you can also find all of the code written in this video, links to the libraries, and overall go through this lesson at your own pace. We're actually going to move from the most naive and sadly common implementation to the most robust one. So we're going to start off with using just strings and nulls all over the place, and we're going to work our way toward a beautiful, clean code. The best, the most robust implementation will require us to use subtypes package, which fixes up Dart's lacking functionality. Because, for example, some types are implemented as sealed classes in Kotlin or as powerful enums in Swift, but Dart doesn't have any such native functionality. A while ago, I actually made a tutorial on the sealed unions package, and although we could use it even for this project, the subtypes package is actually better in my opinion, and it just came out with awesome updates, so we're going to use subtypes instead of sealed unions. If you want to learn more about sealed unions, check out the tutorial from the card in the corner. So let's go right into pubspec YAML, and we are going to add a new dependency, subtypes. So let's just add that, and it also comes with a subtypes generator. So we're actually going to just copy this and add it also to dev dependencies with the underscore generator. And of course, let's also add another dev dependency, which will be the build runner package. And we're just going to use its latest version. And now we have everything we need imported. And once we save the pubspec YAML file, we can now use subtypes from within our app, which is actually going to be just a simple console application, so that I do not bore you with creating the Flutter UI and all of that, because it's not really something which is specific to subtypes. So the way our project is organized is that we have a main.dart file, which is located under the bin folder, and this just calls the run method, which is located under mytypes.dart. So whenever we run the project, this run method will be executed. So without any further ado, let's get right to it, and we're going to start off with the worst approach. So we know we want to store some postal address information, most importantly the US state or Canadian province. So we're going to create a postal info class. And for now, as I've said, let's be completely naive and implement everything by using strings and nulls. And overall, the code will be really a mess. So class postal info, which will hold final string. And let's just add some other field just for good measure, street. This is not what we are interested in. What we are actually interested in is the final string, state or province. And of course, in a real CRM app, there would be more fields, like for example, I don't know, apartment number or something like that. But here we are really just building a fake CRM app. So let's now create a constructor. I'm actually going to use a nifty VS Code extension for generating the constructor. It doesn't do anything else than just create an optional constructor which has named parameters, but of course we also want to make these required. So we're going to import meta.dart and now use the required annotation also on the state or province field. And then we simply want to make sure that none of these class fields will be null. And we can do that with an assert. So we're going to say street doesn't equal null. And also assert that state or province doesn't equal null. And with that, we've just created something which kind of works, but it doesn't work as well as we might expect. Let's just also create a toString implementation, and we're just going to simply output the street, comma, and state or province directly. You can immediately see that the code which we have just written is completely unsafe. Of course, we are storing the state or province as a string. So this means that state or province field can be assigned any sort of a value, even something like ABC, which is definitely neither a state in the US or a province in Canada, of course. So let's demonstrate how we can currently use this postal info class inside the run method. And I'm actually going to just copy some code from the written article, so definitely check it out if you want to follow along and copy the code as well, because I do not want to bore you with creating a bunch of instances of postal info. All right, here we go. We are creating 4 instances of postal info inside the run method. The first one contains some United States street, and the state or province is Florida, which is correct. That's cool. Then we have some Canadian street, and the state or province is Ontario. Of course, we don't know if we've just specified state or if we've specified province, because we've just specified some string. We don't really know which one it is, whether it's state or province. But for now, let's just ignore that. This code is basically correct. But as we go down, we can see that this is completely wrong, because surely there is no state or province which is called XYZ. So this should not be able to compile, but it does. Of course, we can fix this simply with an enumeration, with an enum. We're going to do that in just a little while, but even enums are not enough for fixing our problems with this state or province field, but definitely enums can ease things out. But down here, the last example is completely wrong, but it still compiles. It's just going to throw a runtime error. That's because we are not assigning state or province. Despite that, we get the analyzer warning, the parameter state or province is required, but still, this does not prevent the code from being run and compiled. But because of the way we've set up postal info class, if we take a look at the implementation, we can see that we are asserting that state or province should not be null. And when we do not assign the state or province field, it's indeed going to be null, and this is going to result in a runtime crash because this assert will not pass. And definitely having runtime crashes, it's something which you should not be relying upon, especially once you ship your app to real customers. If we now run this code, we should see the output of the first 3 postal info objects because we are printing them afterwards. And the last one will throw a runtime error. So let's try that. And surely we can see some US street, some Canadian street, some XYZ state or province street, and then the last one just has thrown an assertion error, so that just simply will not run the last example where we have completely left out the state or province field. So let's end this horrible implementation of postal info class and let's move not to the best implementation, but something which you might want to do if you just did not know about subtypes, that something like that even exists. In a classic object-oriented programming where subtypes are not present, you would do the following. We want to design our types to better reflect the domain. And surely, state or province is not just a string. It's actually really a state or province. So instead of representing it as a dumb string type, we're going to create a custom state or province class. Let's just do that above the postal info. So class state or province. And in this class, since we are not using subtypes yet, we will want to store both the US state and Canadian province as a field. So let's first actually create 2 enums. The first one will be US state, which will for now just hold Florida, because we do not want to have all of those 50 plus states over here. And another enum will be CA province. And for now, we're just going to have Ontario. And now this state or province will hold 2 final fields, US state, let's just call it US state of course, and final CA province, CA province. And now we're going to again generate a constructor. So this constructor is again optional named constructor, but this time we cannot even provide the required annotation on these fields because this is a state or province. So we have to leave both of these fields non-required because the client code will of course assign only either the US state or the Canadian province, but not both of them at once. And this is immediately apparent that it's a problem, but we're going to continue with this approach and then we're going to fix it with subtypes, of course, toward the end of this tutorial. We're doing this just so that you understand how powerful subtypes are and how to actually really design with types. As you know from the beginning of this tutorial, designing with types will make your code not even compile when you introduce some error in the client code. You have to set up your types that way that writing wrong code will not be even possible, and that's definitely a good thing. And let's just provide asserts, or actually just one assert, which will say that the US state cannot be null, or the Canadian province cannot be null. So at least one of these fields has to be assigned, but again, this is done with an assert check, which will only result in a runtime crash, and that's again not something which you should strive to do. You should strive to have compile time errors, not runtime errors. And let's just again provide a toString implementation, which will simply say that when the US state doesn't equal null, then we want to return the US state string. Actually, we have to transform it to a string with interpolation, so US state. Otherwise, we're going to interpolate a string containing the Canadian province. And with that, we can now update the postal info class to hold the state or province inside a state or province object. Of course, doing this has just broken the run method, because over here we are setting the state or province to be simply an FL string. So we have to change that to hold state or province and select the US state and assign it a US state.Florida. We want to do a similar thing over in the postal info for Canadian customers. So we're going to assign a CA province, and the CA province, as you can see, cannot be Florida because it's a US state. So we are definitely moving toward the right direction. So we have to assign it a CA province Ontario for it to compile. What's awesome is that we have just gotten rid of this error where we assign XYZ to be the state or province, because there is just no possible way to assign XYZ, because state or province has to be of type state or province. This type takes in either a CA province or US state, and we just cannot assign XYZ to either of them. So there is just no way this code will compile. So it's not going to compile anymore, and we're just going to comment this code out for now, because it just cannot even compile. And even with our current approach of having a state or province class, we can still afford to not assign the state or province field, even though we get notified by the analyzer. So this would again, of course, throw a runtime error. But what's even worse now is that we can assign it. So state or province will be just state or province, but we can leave now this one empty. And we are not going to even get an analyzer warning, because as you remember, state or province cannot have its parameters required, because either one of them can be not assigned by definition, because it's state or province. So now, even though we do not get any warning, we are still going to get a runtime error. So these two should print out their information, and the last one will throw an error. So let's try it. And of course, when we open up the debug console, we can see some US street, some Canadian street, and then an assert error now from the state or province class, because this assert has not succeeded because both US state and Canadian province are currently null. Also, there is another aspect of the CRM system which we are currently implementing, because that's sending letters. Of course, we do not just want to collect our customers' information, we also somehow want to automate the letter sending process. And our customers reside either in the United States or in Canada. And of course, there is a different process in sending the letter depending on the country of the recipient. So let's just add 3 simple placeholder methods for printing a physical letter, sending a letter to the USA, or sending it to Canada. I'm again just going to copy and paste the code from the written tutorial, so check it out from the link in the video description. All the way down inside this Dart file, under the run method, I'm going to paste that code. So we have just a simple print letter method which accepts postal info, and then it prints out a letter, not physically but only to the debug console. And then we have 2 methods, ship letter with United States Post Office and then ship letter with Canada Post. We're going to combine these 3 methods inside another method called send letter. So void send letter. It's again going to accept postal info, and inside here we need to decide where precisely, or with which company, postal company, we should ship that particular letter based on the state or province field of postal info. The only way by which we can currently differentiate between Canadian customers and United States customers is the state or province field. And of course, you would probably not determine the country of the recipient from a state or province field, but rather you would have some separate country field in your class. But just for the sake of an example, we are going to continue with the state or province field. Currently, the only way in which we can check to which country we should send the letter is with a simple if statement, where we have to check if postalinfo.state or province.US state doesn't equal null. If it doesn't, we know that we should send the letter to the United States. So we are going to do some automatic physical printing and ship the letter. So we're just going to call our placeholder methods, so print letter and ship letter USPS. And then else we're going to again print letter and ship it via Canada Post. Let's now call this send letter method. From the run method, we're just going to comment out the code which throws a runtime error. So we have two instances of postal info US and also postal info Canada. So let's just call send letter with postal info US and then also with postal info CA. And with that, when we now run this code, it's going to run just fine. So we can see that we have just sent out a letter to some US street, yours truly ResoCoder, and we've shipped it to United States, and the Canadian letter was indeed shipped to Canada. But the question is the code inside send letter safe and good? It's not. Can we just simply use an else clause of an if statement to ship the letter to Canada? In this case, we can, because we currently do not support any more countries. So letters which do not go to the United States should indeed go to Canada. But what if we add another supported country later? For example, we can add United Kingdom into our supported countries list. But with the business expanding to other countries, we might forget to update this send letter method, because even if we add UK, whatever is their county, we will not get any compile time errors for not handling it inside an else if clause, because this code in that instance should look like this. So else if the state or province or county now is UK county, just a placeholder code, pseudocode. So if this is done, we should again print the letter and ship the letter to UK shipping. So this is how the code should theoretically look like, but we are not going to get any compile time errors, even though it doesn't look like that. We'll just simply need to remember to update it. Another objection to this code is that once you come to this code in a few months because you are updating some functionality, you're probably going to be scratching your head, wondering if actually the CA province cannot be just null. Think about it. Here we are checking if state or province.US state doesn't equal null. So over here we know that US state is not null if this if statement actually runs. But here we are just simply inside an else clause. So we might really wonder, after we've forgotten how we have implemented the code, if the CA province cannot be just null. Of course, it cannot be null because of the way we've set up our asserts inside the state or province class. But we are probably not going to remember that we've implemented this assert in a few months' time. And we are again just going to be jumping around in code in multiple definitions, and we are going to lose track of what we were trying to do in the first place. The bottom line is that you should not implicitly remember things, but instead make them explicit in the code in a way which produces compile time errors And that's what we are going to do with subtypes right now. We simply need to fix this state or province class because although it really represents just one thing, state or province, both at the same time basically, it still holds two separate fields, which can be null. And this causes all kinds of errors which we have just gone over. So how can we make two distinct cases, in this case US state and Canadian province, be represented by just one type? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is inheritance, but that would be clunky and hard, and we would still not get any of the benefits of using subtypes like compile time errors. So instead of inheritance and doing some crazy stuff, we're going to use subtypes, which are really awesome and simple to use. Subtypes will ensure that we cannot possibly input any wrong values to the state or province field of the postal info class. So if we want to say this more elaborately, the formal definition is that subtypes make a legal state unrepresentable, which means you just get compile time errors. Also with subtypes, should we add a support for United Kingdom customers, immediately after that, the send letter method will break. We won't be able to ignore UK customers. We'll need to handle them because otherwise the code will again not compile. So without any further talking about how awesome subtypes are, let's implement them right now for the state or province class. The subtypes package, which we have added at the beginning of this tutorial, works by code generation. So we need to add a part to this mytypes.dart file. We're going to call it mytypes.g.dart. And let's just delete all of the content of the state or province class because it's going to be a subtype. And subtypes are created as an annotation on a mixin, which should be package private or with simply an underscore before the name. And of course, so that the code generation can proceed, we need to mark this with a subtype annotation, which we need to import, of course, from subtypes.dart. And this subtype accepts a list of cases. So instead of holding enum values in fields, in two separate fields, we're going to hold the enum values inside cases. So the first one will be holding US state value, and we're going to give it a name US state. And then similarly, we are going to have a case for CA province, and we're going to call it CA province, of course. And then apart from this being a mixin, we also need to implement a not yet generated class state or province base. Let's actually just build this at first, and then I'm going to explain subtypes in more detail. So we are going to say either pub run build runner build if you have Dart installed separately, or if you are just a Flutter developer, you can of course also run Flutter packages. Pub run build runner build, it doesn't really matter. Let's just run this command, and the new file mytypes.g.dart will be generated for us. This is all the boilerplate which you need for a subtype. So if you've watched my previous tutorial on sealed unions package, this is definitely a lot less boilerplate than with that sealed unions package. So subtypes are awesome. The state or province really represents one thing, because we can either assign a US state or Canadian province to its instance directly and not just to some fields which are held inside that class. Of course, it's actually done with fields in the generated file. We can see that there are const constructors which are named and all of that. So behind the scenes, it uses fields, but really the client code, which uses the finished generated class, cannot see those fields because they are hidden under the implementation. So that's what we are looking for precisely. So now we've just broken the run method because we cannot instantiate state or province and just simply pass it US state Florida. Instead, we have to use the state or province's named constructor. So either US state and pass it Florida, or CA province. So .ca province and pass it CA province.ontario. And of course, we get access to other static members of state or province, for example, this unsafe, but that's only because we are using it from the same package or from the same file in this case. So that's just some limitation of Dart. Even though it's private, we can still use it. Unfortunate, I know, but that's just something we have to live with in Dart. And now if we uncomment these two erroneous postal info instances, we of course cannot assign in any way X, Y, Z, because like, how are we going to do that? We can specify CA province and still X, Y, Z cannot be assigned even to a subtype. But what's even better is that even the last error will not compile because state or province cannot be just left blank. We have to use one of those named constructors, so CA province, and this has to take in an instance of CA province enum, so we cannot just leave this blank. And also we cannot leave it blank if we use the US state constructor, because even here we need to assign some US state. Awesome. We cannot have such errors anymore, which is definitely a good thing. So we have just made illegal states unrepresentable. We can now just comment out or delete all of this. You can of course still find all of this even erroneous code inside the written tutorial, to which you can get from the link in the video description on resocoder.com. In addition to getting compile time errors for these instances of postal info, the send letter method is also kind of broken. If we now run the code and check out its output, we can see that still send letter works because we've just printed out some US street letter and shipped it to United States. And also we have printed out Canadian letter and shipped it to Canada. And this current implementation of send letter is again possible only because of stupid Dart decisions, which I really don't know what they were thinking when they were implementing the Dart language. For example, Dart doesn't have real protected members. And if we take a look at the implementation of US state field in the generated class, we can see that inside the generated file mytypes.g.dart, it's marked as protected. And so is the CA province. So we should not be simply able to access the US state directly on a state or province instance of the subtype. We should not be able to do that. But we are because of Dart. And because we are inside the same package, inside the same file of which the generated file is a part of, we do not even get any kind of an analyzer warning. So that's horrible. But even though we can do that and the code runs just fine seemingly, by doing this, by having this if statement and this else clause, we are still going to run into the same problem as I've described previously when we want to add United Kingdom customers to our supported customers list, because we are still not going to get any developer tooling, any guidance, or simply said this code will not break once we add another case to the state or province subtype definition. So how can we circumvent this? Well, instead of using an if statement, there is an awesome inline switch method on every single subtype. So let's just define it above. We're going to say postal info.state or province.iSwitch, which means inline switch. And this default iSwitch forces you to handle all of the cases, which is a good thing. And this iSwitch O, which stands for iSwitch otherwise, allows you to leave out a certain case. So with iSwitch O, we would be again in the precisely same situation as we are now with the if statement. So if you really want to make your code safe, you should not use iSwitch O, which stands for otherwise, but iSwitch. And with that inside iSwitch, we have to handle two distinct cases. And even though because of Dart, we are still not going to get really a compile time error with this iSwitch, we're just going to get analyzer warning and then a runtime crash if we ignore this warning. It's still better than no warning at all. If we do not handle, for example, Canada here, we don't get any warning with the if statement, but at least we get a warning with iSwitch that we should handle US state and CA province. So let's do that right now. We're going to specify the US state, which should be a higher order function, receiving a US state, and over here we can just cut and paste the code from the if statement. So we are going to ship letter by USPS. And once we format this, we now can handle CA province. And of course, we do not even need the instance of the state or province. So even though this would grant us the CA province instance, which we could subsequently use if we needed to, we can really just ignore these provinces and states with an underscore. So let's do just that. And now we can delete this now empty if statement and run the code once again. And when we go again to the debug console, we can see that everything was printed and shipped as before, but now it's done in a safer manner, because as soon as we add another case, for example, case, let's just do string, and name will be UK county, and we run again the build command, what's going to happen is that immediately we are going to get a warning that iSwitch does not handle a UK county case. Again, not as good as compile time error, but still miles better than not getting any warning at all. Let's just tackle one more issue with the current state of this state or province subtype. If we now take a look at the output from the state or province converted to string, we can see that it contains a lot of unnecessary stuff. While previously we printed out only the enum value CA province Ontario, now we are printing out state or province.ca province and then only the actual province which we are interested in. So how can we remove this CA province thing from the string? Well, if we take a look at the generated file, and actually let's just before that remove the case for United Kingdom. So let's again run the build step. If we take a look at the generated file, we can see that it has a toString implementation. And over there, it prints out either US state containing the value, which is an enum converted to string, but then it wraps it inside a runtime type. And it's precisely this runtime type which we want to definitely remove. And of course, we could just modify this generated toString directly. So remove the runtime type, remove the wrapper of US state, and also of CA province, and do all that, and just run the app again. And now we should not have any of that boilerplate inside the string output, and surely we can see that we now print out only CA province.ontario. But of course, modifying generated classes is the worst practice of all of them, because as soon as you generate something again, our changes will get overwritten. So instead of modifying the generated class, we need to modify what we define inside this state or province mixin. And sadly, code inside a mixin cannot override instance methods. So even if we create a toString implementation, what we return from over here, this is going to get ignored and it's not going to get triggered whenever we call toString. Instead of this toString method, what we will trigger is, again, just the generated toString inside the actual class state or province and not inside the state or province mixin. So instead of overwriting toString, we're going to create a new toFormatted string. And from there, we're going to return an iSwitch, which we pull from the state or province base, which is an abstract class defining these iSwitch methods. And again, we are just going to handle a US state, and this time we actually do want to get the state instance here, and we are going to return simply state interpolated inside a string. And then similarly, we want to have CA province, which will get us a province. And we're going to return the province string from over here as well. However, by having a non-standard toString method, we lose out on the beautiful interpolated strings integration, because for example here inside postal info.toString, here we are calling state or province, and we just basically interpolate it, and it's automatically going to convert that to state or province.toString. So something like this is happening behind the scenes. Now, however, we do not want to convert it to string, but instead to our own custom formatted string. So we have to specify this method ourselves. Another place where we want to call toFormatted string is inside the print letter method, where we want to print state or province dot toFormatted string. So this is how you can add your own custom members to your subtypes. You actually want to add them to the mixin. And as you can learn from a separate tutorial on mixins, to which you can get by clicking on the card in the corner, mixins can hold both methods and also fields, so you can really add some custom functionality to your subtypes. For example, toFormatted string. So if we now run this code, open up the debug console even before, and now run this, we are still going to get the same output as before, but before we have modified the generated class, and now we have left the generated class untouched. Instead, we defined our own toFormatted string, which is definitely a better approach than just modifying a generated class. To go through this tutorial at your own pace once again and to get all of the code, check out the written tutorial from the link in the description. Using subtypes not only saves you from runtime crashes and other headaches, but it also saves you a lot of time, because after all, writing all of those crazy null checks doesn't get handled by itself. On the other hand, if you use subtypes and use the iSwitch, which means inline switch method, it will immediately tell you which cases you need to handle, unlike an if statement or a default darts switch statement, which doesn't tell you a thing. If you do not want to miss more tutorials like this, definitely subscribe to this channel and also join the notification squad by hitting the bell button to make sure you grow your Dart and Flutter skills, because here on ResoCoder I am determined to provide you with the best app development tutorials and resources out there. If this video helped you to understand some types and how to design with types and how to prevent runtime crashes by proper type design, give this video a like and also share it with our developers who will surely benefit from this information too. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, and see you in the next video.